The Jameses looked like any other happy family. They had a nice home in a quiet neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. David James was a busy lawyer providing well for his family. Laura, his wife, stayed home to take care of their teenage kids, Emily and Jake. Everything seemed fine from the outside, but inside things were different. Laura felt more alone with each passing day. David worked long hours, leaving early and coming back late, barely spending time with her. What was once a loving marriage now felt cold and distant. The fun and connection they once had faded, and all that was left were brief talks about the kids or daily chores. Laura was sinking into a deep loneliness, and this is where everything started to go wrong. Behind the doors of their perfect home, a storm was brewing that would soon tear this family apart. Laura's loneliness kept growing. David, always tied up with his job, barely noticed the distance forming between them. For Laura, the days started to feel like they were all the same: wake up, take care of the house, look after the kids, and wait for David to come home. But when he did, there was no warmth, no spark, just empty conversations. She missed the days when they laughed together and felt close. One day, everything changed when Ethan Moore, their neighbor's 19-year-old son, came back home for winter break. Ethan had grown up right next door, and Laura had known him since he was a kid, but now he wasn't the awkward teenager she remembered. He was different, confident, charming, and full of life. For the first time in years, Laura felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It started out simple. They would wave at each other when they passed by, or chat for a few minutes when they ran into each other outside. But soon these innocent encounters became something more. Laura found herself looking forward to the moments when she'd see Ethan. What began as small talk quickly turned into longer conversations, and with each meeting, an unspoken tension started to build. What was once a harmless connection was slowly turning into something dangerous. By January 2012, the subtle tension between Laura and Ethan had become impossible to ignore. David was away on one of his frequent business trips, leaving Laura alone once again. She couldn't shake the feelings of loneliness, and in a moment of weakness, she invited Ethan over. The excuse was innocent enough: she needed help with a leaky faucet. Ethan came over that afternoon, and it didn't take long for the atmosphere to shift. The moment they stood together in the kitchen, their hands brushing as they worked, the air was thick with anticipation. What had started as innocent flirting had now crossed a line. Laura and Ethan couldn't resist the pull between them, and from that day forward they were no longer just neighbors. Their affair began in secret, with stolen moments whenever David wasn't around. They knew it was wrong, but the thrill of the forbidden only fueled their desire. Soon their meetings became a routine, with Ethan sneaking over while David was at work. Each time, the risk of getting caught hung over them, but neither of them was willing to stop. For Laura, Ethan had brought back a feeling she had long forgotten: the feeling of being wanted. But what they didn't know was that their secret was about to unravel, and the consequences would be far more than either of them ever imagined. As the affair deepened, the excitement of secrecy kept Laura and Ethan going, but Laura knew the danger of what they were doing. Every glance out the window, every sound outside the door made her heart race with fear. What if someone found out? What if David came home early? These thoughts haunted her constantly, but the emptiness she felt when Ethan wasn't around was even harder to bear. Ethan, on the other hand, was growing more attached. What started as a thrill for him had turned into something more serious. He wanted Laura all to himself, pushing her for more time together, and even hinting at the idea of her leaving David. But Laura knew that was impossible. She had a family, a reputation, and a life that she couldn't just throw away. Still, the pull of the affair kept her coming back. Ethan made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years, and the thought of losing that was terrifying. But with every secret meeting, the risk grew, and it wasn't long before someone began to notice. It wasn't long before the affair caught the attention of their sharp-eyed neighbor, Mrs. Green. She lived right across the street and had a perfect view of the Jameses' house. Mrs. Green had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and she noticed everything. When she started seeing Ethan's car parked at Laura's house during odd hours, her curiosity was piqued. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe Ethan was just being helpful around the house. But when she saw him leaving late at night, sneaking out in the dark, her suspicions grew stronger. Mrs. Green was not one to keep things to herself, and soon, whispers started to spread throughout the neighborhood. The rumors didn't take long to reach David's ears. While he had been too busy with work to notice the small signs, the times Laura seemed distant, the new cologne scent in their bedroom, he couldn't ignore the growing gossip. The whispers gnawed at him, forcing him to pay attention to the details he had missed before. Something wasn't right, and David could feel it. David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, so he decided to take action. On March 15th, he made up his mind to follow Laura. That day, instead of going to work, he stayed nearby, watching the house from a distance. His heart pounded as he saw her leave and head to a nearby park. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, waiting. They exchanged a few words, and while their meeting seemed brief, it was enough to confirm David's worst fears. The affair wasn't just a rumor, it was real. Anger and betrayal boiled inside him as he watched from afar, unable to believe what was happening. The picture-perfect life he thought they had was falling apart right before his eyes. That moment changed everything for David. Consumed by jealousy and rage, he couldn't think straight. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing for certain: things would never be the same again. He was no longer just suspicious, he had proof. And now it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. David's anger grew with each passing day, and he couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. He confronted Laura once more, this time with a quiet, simmering rage that frightened her. She could see in his eyes that he knew something was terribly wrong. Laura had no choice but to come clean. Fearing what might happen if she didn't, she confessed everything: the affair, the lies, and how far things had gone with Ethan. Laura admitted that Ethan had been growing more possessive and demanding, pressuring her to leave David. Ethan had even threatened to confront David if she didn't make a decision soon. Hearing this, David's fury shifted. His anger was no longer just at Laura, but at Ethan as well. The young man wasn't just a fling, he had become a serious threat to their family. Still, David tried to keep his emotions in check, but inside he was boiling over with betrayal and pain. He knew he had to confront this situation head-on, but before he could make his next move, things spiraled out of control in a way no one could have predicted. On the night of March 18th, everything took a dangerous turn. Ethan, driven by his obsession with Laura, decided to take matters into his own hands. In his mind, if David was out of the picture, he and Laura could finally be together. With this twisted thought, Ethan grabbed a wrench from his father's garage and followed David home from work. He waited outside the house, watching as the lights inside went out. Ethan was determined, convinced that this was the only way to get what he wanted. But what he didn't know was that David, already on edge from Laura's confession, had been watching from inside. David sensed something was off and prepared himself for a confrontation. When Ethan tried to sneak into the house, David was ready. What followed was a brief but intense struggle. Ethan, in a fit of rage, swung the wrench, but David fought back in self-defense, grabbing a baseball bat he kept near the door. The final blow was swift and fatal. Ethan collapsed to the floor, lifeless. In an instant, David's world changed forever. He hadn't planned for things to end this way, but now he had to face the harsh reality of what had just happened. After the fatal confrontation, David stood in shock, staring at Ethan's lifeless body. The chaos that had been brewing for months had finally erupted, and now there was no turning back. Laura rushed to David's side, horrified by the violence that had unfolded. She urged him to call the police, knowing that trying to cover this up would only make things worse. With shaking hands, David made the call, and within minutes, the authorities arrived at the scene. David was taken into custody, but his confession was clear: he had acted in self-defense. The evidence backed him up. The wrench found next to Ethan's body, and the signs of a struggle confirmed David's story. Laura, still overwhelmed by guilt and fear, cooperated with the investigation, admitting to the affair and explaining how things had spiraled out of control. As the investigation deepened, Detective Karen Murdoch was assigned to the case. Known for her sharp instincts, she quickly saw that this wasn't just a case of self-defense. There were deeper layers to the story, and it all pointed back to the dangerous relationship between Laura and Ethan. The secrets, the lies, and the betrayal had all led to this tragic end. The case quickly drew attention, and by April 15, 2012, the trial was underway. The media swarmed the courthouse, eager to cover every detail of the scandal. It had everything: infidelity, obsession, and a deadly confrontation. David pleaded not guilty to murder, insisting that he had acted only to protect himself. The defense presented the evidence of Ethan's threats and his erratic behavior, backing up David's claims of self-defense. Laura's testimony was crucial. She admitted to her affair with Ethan, explaining how things had spiraled out of control and led to the tragic confrontation. Her remorse was clear as she described the fear and desperation that had consumed her, but her role in the affair couldn't be ignored. The affair had set off the chain of events that ended in Ethan's death. After weeks of tense courtroom drama, The jury returned their verdict on April 30th, 2012. David was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, acknowledging that while he had killed Ethan, it was under extreme provocation and in self-defense. The judge, considering the circumstances, sentenced David to 2 years in prison. Laura, convicted as an accessory after the fact, received a 1-year sentence. The once perfect James family was shattered, and their lives would never be the same. The aftermath of the trial left the James family in pieces. While David and Laura were serving their sentences, the real toll fell on their children, Emily and Jake. The small, close-knit community they once called home turned its back on them. At school, Emily and Jake faced constant whispers, judgmental stares, and outright bullying. Emily, who had once been surrounded by friends, was now isolated, walking through the hallways as rumors followed her. Jake, once the star of his soccer team, was benched, and his teammates kept their distance, afraid to be associated with the scandal. The weight of their parents' mistakes was too much for the teenagers to bear. They were angry, hurt, and confused, trying to understand how their world had crumbled so fast. Laura knew she had a long road ahead to fix the damage she had caused. Even from behind bars, she worked tirelessly to rebuild her relationship with Emily and Jake, sending letters and trying to explain how things had gone so wrong. But trust was not something that could be restored overnight. The family's name was tainted and their future uncertain, but Laura was determined to piece things back together, no matter how broken everything seemed. When David was finally released from prison, the James family knew they couldn't return to their old life. The scandal had left deep scars in the community, and staying there wasn't an option. So they packed up and moved to a new town, hoping for a fresh start. This wasn't just about escaping the gossip, it was about healing the wounds within their own family. Rebuilding wasn't easy. David and Laura's marriage, once shattered by lies and betrayal, had to be carefully mended. During his time in prison, David had plenty of time to reflect on everything that had happened. He wasn't ready to forgive Laura completely, but he knew they needed to focus on their family if they were ever going to move forward. For Emily and Jake, adjusting to a new school and community was another challenge. Though the whispers and stares had faded with the move, the emotional damage lingered. They had lost trust in their parents, and it would take time to feel like a family again. But as the days passed, the James family slowly began to rebuild their lives, determined to leave the past behind and find a new way forward. Over time, the James family started to heal, but the process was slow. Laura focused on making things right with her children, Emily and Jake, knowing that they were still dealing with the fallout of her actions. She encouraged open conversations at home, giving them the space to express their anger and pain. It wasn't easy for them to forgive her, but Laura was patient, willing to do whatever it took to mend their broken relationship. David, too, was working on rebuilding his connection with his children. He had always been focused on his career, but after everything that had happened, he realized how much he had missed. The family's move to a new town gave them a chance to start fresh, and slowly, they began to find their footing again. With time, the bond between them strengthened. The lessons they had learned from their painful experience taught them the importance of communication, honesty, and staying close as a family. While the scars of the past would never fully heal, they were ready to leave behind the chaos that had once torn them apart and build a future based on trust and understanding. As the years went by, the James family grew closer, but the memory of Ethan's tragic end lingered in the background. David and Laura had learned hard lessons from the events that shattered their lives, but they refused to let those dark times define their future. The move had been the right choice, allowing them to leave behind the judgment and shame that once consumed them. David and Laura's marriage, though scarred, became stronger than before. They were more open with each other, no longer taking their relationship for granted. They had been through the worst and had come out the other side with a deeper appreciation for their family. Emily and Jake, after years of struggling with the weight of their parents' mistakes, found their way back to some sense of normalcy. With the support of their parents, they started to regain their confidence, rebuilding their lives in a way that was far healthier than before. In the end, the James family, once broken by secrets and betrayal, learned the importance of facing their problems head-on. They emerged from their trials more united, with a renewed commitment to each other and a stronger sense of what truly mattered in life. In the months and years following their move, the James family did their best to put the past behind them. But no matter how far they moved or how much they rebuilt, the shadow of what had happened with Ethan always lingered. The community they left behind never forgot, and sometimes whispers of their old life would find them, but they learned to shut it out. David, though no longer haunted by the intense anger and betrayal he once felt, carried the weight of what had happened that night with Ethan. He knew he had acted in self-defense, but the reality of taking a life stayed with him. It was something he and Laura rarely spoke about, though the event had changed both of them forever. Laura, for her part, worked tirelessly to prove that she had changed. She knew her choices had shattered their once picture-perfect life, but she was determined not to let that define her. Day by day, she showed her family that she was committed to them, and slowly trust was rebuilt. Though their lives would never be the same, the James family found a way to move forward. They understood that the pain of the past would always be a part of their story, but they were no longer trapped by it. In the end, they emerged as a family stronger, not in spite of their struggles, but because of them. As the James family settled into their new life, they carried the lessons from the trial and sentencing with them. David's 2-year sentence and Laura's 1-year punishment were behind them, but the impact of that time was still fresh. Prison had given both of them space to reflect on everything that led to that night. David, once consumed by anger and betrayal, found clarity during his time inside. He realized how much he had missed by being so focused on his career and ignoring the emotional needs of his family. The time in prison allowed him to come to terms with what had happened and how to move forward. For Laura, her time behind bars was filled with regret and self-reflection. She knew she couldn't undo the damage caused by the affair, but she also knew that the only way to heal was to face it head-on. When she was released, she made it her mission to reconnect with her children and rebuild the trust she had lost. Though the trial had been a public spectacle, filled with sensational headlines and media attention, the real challenge for David and Laura was in repairing the private damage done to their family. They didn't want to be defined by the past, but the lessons they learned from their mistakes shaped how they moved forward. By the time David and Laura were both out of prison, they knew that healing wouldn't be easy, but they were committed to putting in the work. Their relationship with Emily and Jake, once strained by the lies and scandal, was slowly starting to repair. Laura spent countless hours having honest conversations with her children, listening to their anger and their pain. She didn't try to defend her actions. Instead, she focused on helping them understand that despite everything, they were still a family. David, who had always been more distant due to his demanding career, realized how important it was to be present for his children. He no longer let work consume his life, making sure to spend time with Emily and Jake, rebuilding the bond he had neglected for so long. Though it was a long road, the James family found strength in their ability to be open and honest with each other. Slowly, the bitterness and anger that had once torn them apart began to fade. The scars of their past would always be there, but they were no longer defined by it. In the end, they became a family that had learned to value communication, trust, and above all, each other. They emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held, together.